So anyway, but today we've got two great speakers. The first one is Ariana Chavez, and she is the CFO, right? Control, yeah. She's going to be talking about human resource management for AgriVision Farm Management, which handles human resources for dairies and many other agriculture entities. She was at our Annie's project back in 2003 and 23, and it was very well received. So I'm excited to see her presentation today.
You? Okay. Okay, my name is Ariane Chavez. Like she said, I work for AgriVision Farm Management. We are the hub of financial and the human resources, talent management center for the dairies and the farms that we provide services for. So I'm going to just give you a little bit of introduction to our founders and who our customers are, and a little bit who we are, and then we'll go into some of the other detail. Obviously, we are dairy for as the core of our company. These are our founders, Donald and Sherry DeYoung. So our company is a family entity. I am one of the only non-DeYoungs. No, that's not true, but it is a family entity. So there is a lot of family members that are present, and that brings its own dynamics into the workplace. But this is who they are. So they were originally from California, then they were down in Stephenville area. Donald's brothers are, one is still down in Stephenville, the other one retired. But what brought them up here was they were actually looking for a place to grow their heifers, something that was not as hot in the summer, a little more temperate, and some good land that they could build a heifer ranch. That's what actually brought them up into the Panhandle area. So first and foremost, we actually just implemented our core purpose and our core values. And the reason I wanted to throw that up there is whenever you have a group of people that are working with you, for you, they need direction. They need to know what your direction is. And so, and what you stand for, and how you are going to conduct your business. So whatever that is, however you come up with that definition, it's good to share that with your group, because they are coming to work for their own reasons, right? But they want to make sure most people want to work for someone that has a purpose, that's doing something that they love, and has somewhat of forward thinking of where they're going in the future, that kind of, and how they're going to go about their business. So relationships matter. So when you're working with vendors and you are a customer to some, or you're a vendor to others, how you go about your business is a big deal. And so being able to put that on paper and share that with your team, and that actually pours into your relationships with the vendors and or customers you have, is a big deal. So we've actually just rebranded all of this, and that's kind of been a big to-do in the last couple years. So our team is still embracing these, whereas they're not new values, but it is a rebranding. And so that's been really fun and interesting to see how we get that through to our entire workforce. So, but that's where that is. So this is just a graph on where if you're able to gather your people, and in our case, our cows are our revenue stream. Our land is really a supply chain, right? So we purchase land just to feed our kids. All of our feed does not go anywhere else but into our own dairy. So that's why we did that. And specifically, had to do that when we started our organic line. There just wasn't very many farmers that were in the organic sector yet. And so if we needed to feed our cows organically, we realized that we had to grow it. So that dynamic has changed in the last few years. So when I show a map of where we are, it's different than like the presentation she mentioned we did in 2023. We've actually sold some of the land. We are actually moving, we built a dairy in another state. So being able to scale up is where these overlap, right? Being able to do all that. And as your needs change, you can redirect and you can navigate that. So this is just where we are. So obviously we're at the top of Texas over there. We have farmland, and we have our dairy. We also have some farmland in Colorado that I'll show you guys later what that grows. And then we have our dairy and then farmland as well in Indiana. And we are actually migrating. We're building a barn too up there. Right now we just have the single barn, but that's an organic operation. Down here we have organic and conventional operation. Let that fill up there. Okay, so this is just our organic side. So this would include the dairy that's in Texas here, right outside of Channing, and the Indiana dairy. So those are our two organic locations. And between them two, there's over 432 employees. Dairies are a little more labor intensive with like the milking crew. That one, it takes a lot of people to do that. And then we are farming organically 21,000 acres. So that includes the farmland in Indiana, Colorado, and what's right around us. So organic cows have to be grazed, right? So you have some pasture that's associated with that. So that's what's kind of around us. They're in Channing. Let all my circles come up here. Okay, so this is just again where our farmland is located. So the MPO Hartley, that's our grazing, that's our pastures. The MPO Indiana, we have farmland up there as well, but they also have to graze, so it's also pastures. Colorado is our hay farm, so we have alfalfa in that like Alamosa Basin area. It grows really nice alfalfa, really good milk per ton. So we grow mostly alfalfa there. We do have to rotate crops, so we do have some small grain like oat hay bales come out of there, or we have taken some to grain as well. But this is the core of where we're at, what we grow. So the Bermuda is obviously our grass pastures, but then the alfalfa, the wheat and the alfalfa both go to silage. So those are taken to the alfalfa, not in Colorado, that's baled, but the alfalfa that we grow, we have a couple circles down here by our Texas dairy. And that will go into a haylage bag. And then wheat is taken at silage. And then the corn is silage, and that's just in Indiana. We don't have any corn on our Texas location anymore. There's that. Okay, these are our conventional operations. So right there in Hartley, we have a Jersey dairy. We purchased that dairy in 2014. It is milking 3,300. He's a little bit above that now. We've actually been able to expand a little bit there. And then 2,900 heifers, give or take. He's a little bit above that now. Our Holstein dairy is between Hartley and Dumas. It's in that vicinity. He's at 6,700 milking cows, and then roughly about the same as heifers. And then Nick Farms, that's our conventional farmland, and that strictly does wheat and corn, and all of it goes to silage. So we put up wheatledge and we put up corn silage, and it just feeds these two locations. So we absorb everything we grow. It's a growing crop here, and then it goes over here to be a feed expense.
So do y'all offer contracts to other farmers as well, or does that 5,500 acres cover it all?
No, well, it doesn't. No, it doesn't cover it all.
Okay.
So we have to purchase. Yes.
You do silage contracts?
Yes, we do silage contracts, and with we had a little more farmland in the last couple of years, but more people are growing organically, so we're able to contract more. We don't have to grow everything ourselves organically as well. But conventionally, yes, we have to purchase more, and it goes in the same pits in the bags. You know, we do wheatledge in the pits, and then we have all the corn silage we put usually in bags. And then organically, we also have to purchase a little, we have some externally coming in as well. We can't grow all of our needs. Okay. Okay, so with all that comes equipment. And our guys seem to love equipment. So we, at this point in time, these are just some of the bigger equipment items that we use. But with the equipment comes a whole load of standard operating procedures. So I'm sure if you guys have heard SOPs, you know, there's your preventative maintenance schedules, there's your the logs of before you even turn everything you check before you turn the equipment on. There is what to do when something breaks, like who you call, and you know what's the steps in order to maintain safety while you're trying to, you know, either get out of the pickup or do something that's happening. But also we want to make sure all of our people are trained to use that equipment correctly. So there's training that happens on site that they're with their supervisor, and they have to go through all of that before they can operate equipment. But this, in order to get as much done in a day, we have to have our equipment. And so we have to trust our employees that they're going to take care of the equipment for one. Treat it like it's your own, right? You're gonna wash it down when you need to, not run it into a ditch, hopefully not run it into each other. You know, so there's processes put in place in order to mitigate risk for the company, right? So, but these are just, it's quite a bit of equipment that we are operating and keeping track
How
of.
often do you trade all that?
So the bigger equipment, they run a lot of hours on all of our equipment. So it comes onto the procurement schedule at 3 years. That's kind of the timeline where it should come on. Now, if it's used more heavily, we also have an hour time frame that we're going to look at it.
Yeah.
And so that's typically when we pull it on the procurement list. And then it has to fall into the hierarchy of what's more important, right? When you're talking about where your cash is going to go. So on a good year, you might be able to buy most of your procurement list. On a bad year, you're going to have to pick and choose and fight it out, right? So, yeah, but that's typically, the semi trucks obviously are not on a 3 year, but the tractors and the loaders are on a 3 year. The pickups, that one, it does not usually hit 3 years. It's usually a little bit longer than that. But the semi trucks, that's going to be part of our feed trucks, and that's going to be part of our hauling. We have a trucking company that is under our umbrella that just hauls feed everywhere. And so those are the semi trucks that they belong to that. And then the other ones have feed boxes on the back of them. So they're running quite a bit. Okay. So aligning your business. So this, I kind of alluded to this a little bit ago. So we are changing how we're doing business, essentially. We are not as heavily landowners in our farming side. And part of that is because we realize that we have a lot that we can purchase. We can contract with farmers that are already going organic, or they are also rotating their crops. So like we have built that relationship up to where we don't have to grow everything ourselves, which is nice, right? Your whole supply chain doesn't rely 100% on you, which is where it was a few years ago, at least organically, not conventionally. But being able to take a step back and look at your location, look at where your market is, and being able to trust that your team is with you. So if you have your good team with you, they're doing everything they're supposed to. They've been trained up. They know exactly what their job is and how their job fits into the big picture. You're able to pivot, and however you need to pivot, usually that person or that team member is going to be responsive, and they're going to be welcoming to that pivot because they see their role, they see how it fits in, and they're like, yes, let's change gears and we're off the running, and you're not starting over from ground zero. So, but looking at it from this perspective, saying like, where do we need to be, and being able to take a step back, which is sometimes hard when you're in the middle of your day to day. It's really hard to take a step back and look at it, but it's important for your strategic planning. And when you gear up your teammates to follow you, or not to follow you, but to be ready and know what they're doing, they will follow. And it makes for success for everybody. So with the organic side, I mentioned we were building a barn 2 in Indiana. So we had just built barn 1 a few years ago. But some of the issues but some of the opportunities that came up is that we have a little more space up there where we can still grow our heifers down here, but we can send all of our milking cows up there, and it seems to be working. And so that's where we're pivoting, right? We're gonna add another barn up there and grow in that direction. So, but with that comes more training. We'll have to add a few team members up there, especially on the milking side, because it's a whole other barn. But so there's a lot of decision making that goes in that when you are setting up your team members for success within your business. So we actually did do a survey of our team. This is across everybody. So this is the organic, this is the conventional, dairy and farm, and then our office as well. The talent management, human resources, and accounting and finance staff. And so we were actually recertified this year. I do recommend doing surveys. I personally don't love surveys, but it gives you really good data if the feedback is honest and genuine, right? So you have to keep that in mind. But I think it's good to let your team members give you that feedback and like let it say, hey, this is where I think we're doing well, this is where I don't think we're doing well, and let that be an open conversation, because that's how you're going to be able to get to find those issues and fix those issues, if they're fixable, if it's something you can do something about. But this talks about a little bit of what we offer and how we go about working with a person and their career path, right? So Donald, he always says, like, the more you learn, the more you earn, right? So he doesn't want to cap you. He doesn't want to limit you to say, this is your role, this is what you're supposed to do, and that's it. We set up a training. It's training, but it's also a supervision model. It's called situational leadership. And so that is where you and your supervisor are supposed to have ongoing conversations. And we kind of give a idea of what it should look like. So when you are very brand new, you've already gone through your onboarding orientation and your training. So that's at least a day to watch all the videos, safety videos. You get your big binder of things of, standard operating procedures, all of your, the core values, core purposes, all that stuff that comes with the first day. Pretty much saying this is who we are and this is where you're working. But they should have a standard operating procedure for anything they should be asked to do. So sometimes those tasks, you're like, that shouldn't need a step-by-step. But it's good to just still have the step-by-step. That just covers your basis. For one, when you're explaining to somebody how to do something, you're showing them there's two sides, right? You're talking, they're receiving. It's not always the same thing that's being communicated both ways. What you said is not what they heard, or what you thought you said is not what you actually said. So standard operating procedures fill that gap. So it's pretty much black and white. Like, this is how you do it, this is when you do it, and this is how we know if you did not do it. And how you will find out that we will tell you about it. So standard operating procedures they're not very fun to write, but they're very important. And getting results that are gonna be predictable. Like, if something is not right, you can go back to that and say, where did you not follow the steps? Cause these are like tried and true.
Was that your job or who writes them?
So it depends. We have a lot pretty much already written.
Mhm.
But we review them annually. So, that's not a very fun process either. It's very, paperwork intensive and your eyes are like opening and closing. But we do review it annually because throughout the year, you find little tweaks, you change things. One example on our accounting side, we used to cut checks 2 times a week, and now most of our stuff is ACH. And so now we only cut checks 1 time a week, and then ACH is the other day. That's very small, but we changed it in the SOP and like saying this is how we do stuff, because there's always going to be one person that maybe comes on that's new, and that stuff needs to be exactly how you're doing your business at that point in time. So they are reviewed annually. That's in our office. That's on the farm. So the milking SOP, it's reviewed annually. The breeding SOP, it's reviewed annually. So it's done by, I would say most of our stuff is already written, originally mostly by the managers and or Donald or Sherry. Probably wrote the originals. And then now as the supervisors should be reviewing those and highlighting what's changed. So it's a all hands on deck type of situation. Nobody gets to opt out of standard operating procedures, unfortunately.
So what kind of retention do you have, or is there a lot of turnover, or?
Yeah, it's the turnover rate is, what was it? It's been a little bit interesting these last couple years. So we do have a lot of TN visas. And so with some of them, their visa was either denied, the renewal was denied, which is really unfortunate for some of ours that were at like we have the levels. So level 1 is entry level when you're coming in, and then as you work through your situational leadership, you go through your core competencies, you become an L4. So some of our guys were L4, so they were considered like expert level, and then they couldn't come back. So that's been really interesting to our turnover number.
So has that been more of an issue in the last 6 months, or?
It has probably been an issue for, I would say, 1.5 years.
Okay.
And actually it is less in the last 6 months. I would say it has lightened up a little bit less in the last 6 months. But so on the organic side, we have a lot more TN visas. I would say we had at one point we had up to 80% visa. Wow. TN visas, and a TN visa is a skilled person, a skilled work person. So they have a degree or a certification of some sort, which is different than the other visa program that we utilize is an H-2A, which is a farm laborer. And so those guys come in, or ladies, they come in and they help us on the grazing side in the pastures. So as we move our cows out into the pastures during the summer, we're able to use the H-2A visa for that because it is seasonal. And we can use them on the farm side because it is seasonal. But on a dairy, since it's a year round, the H-2A visa does not work for dairy positions other than our organic side where we can utilize them in the pastures.
So why are they getting denied? Do they tell you why?
They kind of do. They say they answered a question wrong, or something to that extent.
Right.
But what the real reason is behind, I don't know. Because they've been renewed. Some of these people have been renewed prior. Yeah. With no problem. So yeah. That's been a little bit interesting. But I would say our turnover rate, I mean, it was probably like 30%. We lose more so in the milker side. That usually if a milker comes on boards, and if they stay for at least 90 to 120 days, they're probably going to stick with us, but some of them don't stay that long. So, but it is labor intensive. So some of them are just like, it's not for me. So, anyway, so when you're going for, each training, we do have certifications. You have to take a test. You've gone through the training, you've physically showed your supervisor how to do it, and then you go take a test, and then you're certified in that, whatever that test is for, so, or skill is for.
Is that certification recognized by other dairies, or is that something in-house?
No, it's just in-house, and so it's something that we can see that they have successfully done before they get to move up to a different level or move across departments. So it's just an internal certification. It would be nice if we could make it where it'd go cross, but no, it's just a way for us to verify before we put somebody in a position that they're not ready for. So these are just the different areas that they can work in. So there's space for movement. The movement within each of these locations is a little bit different. So like I have mentioned that the milking has the highest turnover. That's usually where they're going to leave. But breeding, that team is pretty well going to stick. They're really very skilled, and they tend to not move out of there. Equipment operators, a lot of times I think out of milking, that's where they move to, is they want to go to operating equipment. So that's a common move. Feeding, they can move into feeding pretty quickly if they want to. Maternity is another one that they don't have a lot of turnover. They pretty much stick with their team. That breeding and maternity, they once they got it figured out, they kind of like they do pretty good in their job.
You got mostly AI or?
Yes,
In the breeding.
we AI everything. Yeah. So our mechanics too. So the mechanics we have, there's a mechanic on each location, but then we also have another shop location where we can drive the equipment over there, and if it needs a little more overhaul, they will work on that. Those guys have been around for a long time as well. So anyway, but there's opportunity for them when they come in. Everybody starts at milking when you come in on the dairy side, and then you can move. So
How long do they have to be in a role before they can move?
so that's with that situational leadership, it really is not a time stamp. You come in as an L1, you have to, within their core, we have core competencies. So like L1, technical skill, you have to be able to milk a cow, but that milking a cow means you have to, confirm that you passed this test. And that test, it means that you were visually observed and you took the written exam, that that you have to, wipe the teeth like 3 times before you put on the machine. So like it gets very specific on some of the locations or the job the locations where you're at. And so whenever you meet that core competency, your manager or your supervisor pushes you through to the next level. There's a pay bump with that, and then you have a new set of core competencies. So now if you're an L2 milker, you have to do this. And then once you do that, you can move to an L3. So it's really not a timestamp. It's really how much you want to work for it. So
for bilingual people? Or
yes.
You only have.
No, they're in Spanish.
Okay.
Yeah. Our TNs, some of them speak English, and can you really read English, but it's not their preferred, like it's not very comfortable for them. And so they definitely get a better benefit with it being translated. So everything we have is in English and in Spanish, including the onboarding videos. So all the onboarding videos that you watch, the animal welfare, the animal welfare videos, those are reviewed more frequently than you would just an onboarding. Like that's an annual review, like everybody has to go through that and like recertify, and including us office staff, even though I'm not usually out there with the cows. It's still something that we have to be certified in. And so that's in English and in Spanish. So
do you deal with the activists at all, or they mostly leave y'all alone?
So we have had some activists, yes, but actually they've been more like passive activists, like with drones. So we don't have a face and a person identified, but we chase drones all night off of our location. So that's really been really fun and interesting. And you know, a drone is considered like a aircraft.
Yeah.
So you can't take it down. And so they have midnight chases trying to find where they're, you know, following the drone to see like where it goes. But those can be managed from so far away. It's hard to.
When Tiffany comes next week, ask her what the legalities are of shooting down a drone. So
Yeah,
she's our ag lawyer.
please ask.
Yeah,
She
she
will
gets
say
really jacked up.
It's
'cause
illegal.
She had so many ranchers call her and be like, well, if this disappears, am I gonna get sued? She's like, I'm not talking about that, you know, so it'll get her jacked up. It's a lot of fun. Yeah.
Yeah, we are, you know, that's kind of not a bummer, but it is a bummer for us. Because they come at night, so it's very disruptive to cattle. Yeah. And so things buzzing around at a relatively low level in the dark is not great for cattle. So anyway, that's kind of where we get it is it's silent activism.
Yeah.
And then if something pops up, sometimes we get phone calls asking things so just asking, you know, questions or whatever, trying to get more information, I guess. But no one's really beating down our door at this point with, you know, pickets and signs and stuff. So this is our office team. I promise I work there. I'm not in there. I was down with flu here when this picture happened, me and all my kids. But yeah, this is our office staff. So this is when we celebrated that we got recertified for the Great Place to Work. So Great Place to Work is just one of the survey options. I mean, there's other survey options you guys can do. Even just like a simple questionnaire, you know, you can do it from a broad spectrum of scale, right? But getting feedback is important, we think, and what we do with that information is obviously up to you guys, but it's valuable information if the people are genuinely gonna answer it. Okay, so this is where we talk about the trainings and the certifications. I've mentioned those before. The Supervisor Academy, I have not mentioned yet. So if you are identified by your supervisor or one of the dairy managers as someone that could be a supervisor. So you either have shown leadership quality, or someone has told them, hey, this person is a leader among our team. They're doing a great job. And keep in mind, someone who's very good technically that may not want to be in a leadership role. And someone that is not that great technically could also be very, very good leaders. So keeping all that in mind, before someone can become a supervisor or roll up into a leadership role, they go through the Supervisor Academy. And this was developed in-house, and in a nutshell, it's just supposed to prep you for things that you would not have seen at your job until you become a supervisor. So things like holding a supervision, like having the core competencies, going through all that, reviewing that with somebody. Time management. So you now no longer just have your job to get through, you're observing your entire team, or just depending on what team you're on, you know, it could be one person or two people or more. But you are now having to be aware of what other people are doing. You cannot just do your own role. So we just try to teach them, or at least give them some tools that they can use when they come up into those situations. How to resolve conflict, workplace conflict, how to do an interview. Sometimes we ask them to sit in on interviews and they've never been in on an interview unless maybe it was their own, on how to conduct an interview. So those are some of the things that go through that Supervisor Academy. And we have found that it's been really helpful in identifying the people in the workforce. So, and at the very end, so once they go through Supervisor Academy, there's tests in there as well, to make sure you get it. they actually meet with Donald and Sherry as well. And so Donald and Sherry have the final say of whether this person is gonna be one of their, into the group of potential supervisors. And so I think that's really good because it also gives a very personal connection. So it's not like if you just went through all the paperwork, you actually get to meet with the owners. And they're just essentially looking for someone that's gonna live up to those core values that we talked about, showed at the beginning. And that they're gonna take care of their people. So, and that's what you want in a supervisor. We also do fun things. So in the summer, these are our H2A guys, the ones that come in and help with our grazing, and our pastures. They have soccer games. And so, with H2As, you have to house them. So they're on site. We have a lot of our, employees on site. We have a lot of housing. And so these jerseys are the different, dairy barns. And so they get to play each other. It's just something fun to do. I mean, they're living on the dairy.
So do the families come too, or is it just them?
No, the H2As is just them, and they're only here for like the 9 months. So they come in. We actually just got ours last week, and this Monday was another group that came in. We had 24 of this year. But they're only here, they go home in October, November.
Okay.
So they're only here for a portion of time, and it's just them, not their families. So anyway, it's a really, really fun for them. And there's a final tournament, and they've built a new facility in Dalhart that has like an indoor turf field. So they actually played for like a little trophy last year. We rented that out, and it was kind of fun. So something a little fun. So then the other piece that we really focus on is the workflow of things. And so we have a few office practices. I kind of mentioned, our SOP for paying bills is, checks on Tuesdays, ACH is Thursdays. That's something very minor, but we have SOPs and we have a workflow for a reason. So it just provides expectations, and people know when the workflow is going to hit their desk. They can plan for it, and we know where the work is supposed to be at any given point in time. So there's a lot of things happening on in the office. So these girls are on our talent management side. That's Bobby and Sylvia. And so they onboard all of our team members. Sylvia does all of the visa paperwork for our H2As and our TNs. So she has a lot of phone calls. They work with consulates, they work with the Social Security office to get our TN visas their Social Security cards. There's a lot of things that they are managing to make sure that we have our best workforce going. I mentioned we have a lot of houses. So they also oversee all of the housing inspections. So they do that quarterly. So they're really busy in that aspect. The other piece that happens in our talent management office is, I've already talked about a lot about training, but we have brought on he was actually one of our farm guys. He's been on our East farm which we don't have anymore. You saw it wasn't over there. But he is now over training and development. So he's going to be doing a lot of the trainings in Spanish. And so he will be able to make sure that there's not a communication gap, our guys, they speak decent, but sometimes when you're explaining something, it gets a little bit lost in translation. So
is Spanish the only language, or are there other ones in there as well? So
there's different dialects, but I think you would still classify it all as Spanish. Okay. But there are different dialects. So sometimes what these girls, because these girls are bilingual, they have to find a different way to explain something because it's just a different dialect between the states and Mexico. So but we also have, so the SOPs tell us how we're supposed to be doing stuff, but it also sets deadlines and expectations. So Most people have a payroll on the schedule, right? But that's one that's a pretty given that we know when payroll is gonna happen. But we also apply that to, when we have, so harvest, let's take in harvest. Harvest usually gets wild and crazy, right? So we do know that at the end of the day, we're supposed to report out as soon as we get the data, tons, right? We know tons, and we know in 2 days we're supposed to have dry matters. And then we know that with our farming, as soon as our contracted ones, whenever we finalize a field, we pay our farmer within 10 days. So there's just deadlines built into everything that keep the office humming. And it sets expectations for our team so that they know what they're supposed to be doing at any time. We also heavily rely on budgets. And so budgeting is a big deal. It keeps everyone spending in check for one. But it also opens up the door for lots of communication. So like even if you're under budget, usually there's a conversation that needs to be happening, like why are you under budget in your vaccines? Like vaccine protocol is pretty much a vaccine protocol. So why are you not spending the money? And if it's the vaccine price dropped, woohoo, perfect. But if you're not giving vaccines, that's a whole nother issue. And budgets unfortunately are a little bit delayed when you're looking retrospectively like that, but it still tells a story and helps you identify like what you're supposed to be looking for. And then managing inventory is a big deal when you get into how much feed that we're carrying. We had a little bit of excess silage. We got, or not silage, but well, silage too, but haylage. We were carrying quite a few years of haylage actually. And so when we were looking into our inventory, it's really great that we have like minimal shrink. That's a really good problem to have. But now we have a lot of feed. And so now we can look at our rations and see if there's some things we can do to get through that feed fast before it spoils. So there's just some other things that you can do that help tell a story of what's happening within your location or within your business. We do use a lot of software for various things. Our main financial software is still QuickBooks. We do have the enterprise desktop version, but most of our entities are still in there. We have all of the big operating entities, so like the dairies and the farms, but then there's a few supplemental businesses like the trucking company that I mentioned, and a few like equipment companies and stuff. So those are all in QuickBooks. Our farm side is in the Centerpoint. So we liked the aspect of being able to filter by a few more classifications. So we are able to filter by a crop or by location and a production year. And so that was the main point for moving to Centerpoint. Fishbowl is still on here, but not for very long. I am actually working on moving our supply. Actually, I didn't mention our supply, but we have a back business that manages all of our supply purchases for the vaccines, medicines, dairy supplies, that kind of stuff. And they're the hub for the shop. So all of the parts run through there. We have found that it is beneficial that it is its own business so that we can find if we have either parts maintenance negligence. So we know if our equipment is not being taken care of by if the shop is not billing any hours and we're not buying any parts. And sometimes that can get buried in an operation. So we operate that separately. But so I'm moving our fishbowl, which is our dairy supplies and everything, into Centerpoint for that reason, because we can classify it by dairy supplies, and we can use the other aspects of the business can be classified into shop, shop repairs, and things of that nature. So fishbowl is not on here very long, but it is a inventory management software is what that is. Manager Plus, it's now called Aptura. It's still called Manager Plus on our thing, but Aptura bought it. That's what we use for our equipment management. So it handles all of our preventative maintenance schedules. All of our assets are listed in there, all of our like rolling assets plus our houses. Housing inspections are in there. And again, that's where all of our parts flow through, so we can see like what's consumed, what should be on a shelf in inventory. Who's not changing their oil when they're supposed to, that kind of thing. We can set that based on an hour interval or like a time interval, if they're just supposed to check the floor on the cattle trailer. We can set that up, so. Dairy comp, that's, I am not in these last two, dairy comp and milk, the office team is not in these two, this is at the dairy location. And it holds all of the cattle, like EID information, so we tag all, they're all tagged. And it tracks all of them and anything that they could have been given. And then milk is the feed program, so it takes all of our rations and spits out how much was fed at the end of the month.
Sorry, do you think you're ever gonna move the other QuickBooks entities onto CenterPoint?
I don't know what we'll do with those. The dairy side, it doesn't necessarily need the multi-classification at this point because we all go through a co-op now. So we have one revenue source and one customer essentially. And so it makes it easier to track on that end. But there are things that QuickBooks cannot do that would be nice if we went to a bigger, different enterprise system.
And that's on desktop still?
It's on desktop. We have one entity that's on QuickBooks Online.
Are they charging you the crazy subscription every year, or are y'all, okay?
So if you moved it to CenterPoint, you would eliminate all those other subscriptions?
Yeah, so CenterPoint, you buy the software up front and then you just pay the customer support subscription piece.
And what do you use
So-
for payroll?
Oh, that's a good point. I don't have that on there. So we use, it was Ultimate Software, but it merged with Chronos, so it's UKG now. So we used to do payroll on spreadsheets, and if you can imagine, we still had 400 employees, but it was on spreadsheets. And my AP team would cut every single one of those paychecks, and I was filing all the tax payments. And I mean, QuickBooks tracks it for you, but you have to go like make the payment, on the tax deposits. And then you have to like run the reports, the quarterly, which we're ag companies, so we only have two, the trucking company is not considered ag, so those would be 941 filing companies, but everyone else would just be 943, so you just have to make the payments, there's not a quarterly filing, but yeah, we were manually doing all that, and we were utilizing QuickBooks to run all of our W2s, W3s. Now we have UKG, and the reason we went to UKG, for one, it eliminated like the physical cutting of payroll checks. So that was a lot of time freed up on the accounting side. But two, it was more for the time clock side. So we had time clocks, kind of. We had time clocks, but they were counted as daily. So it was like a daily wage. So we had time, we knew when they were there because we do have badges and they do have time clocks. But it didn't go into any system that would generate a paycheck. So it was just like a time system. And so that's when the talent management team would download all that, convert it into days. And then it was just a very manual process. So that plus, so we wanted to get that more streamlined. So now they, clock in, clock out. You have to go fix all the exceptions if they do it incorrectly or they show that they worked there for 24 hours. But it's all in the system. And then eventually, we're doing all these trainings and all these certifications and all these tests that is still done manually at this point. But UKG does offer, an LMS system where all that could be on the computer where they could just come take it at their time when they can do it. Right now we have to schedule it, everybody comes in, we do the presentation, you sign your paper, and then that paper gets scanned to your file in UKG proving that you did it, but it's still somewhat manual. But eventually we would like to do the LMS, but the main reason for moving was to get the time clock streamlined And then, of course, the benefits have been outsourcing the paycheck printing and the taxes.
Yeah.
So. That's all I had.
Anybody have any questions for Ari? Y'all are quiet tonight. It's weird. All right, I'm good. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you.
We're very lucky that we got her because part of Annie's is we have to have human resource management and having somebody that manages 400 employees is a lot and it's pretty impressive. Well, and I actually had a college kid from A&M call me this week and wanted to interview me about Annie's. I was a school project apparently. And so she said, what is the challenge of women that the men don't have? And I said, well, we've talked about this, we have jobs and we have kids and we have to cook dinner, but we're also running businesses. And so you were expecting your fourth child,
Yes.
right?
Oh.
So I feel like you should definitely apply to that in addition to everything else we do. Yeah. Hopefully a boy, right?
So it's supposed to be boy.
Yeah.
Our oldest is in second grade.
Okay. So let's go ahead and take about a 5-10 minute break or so, and then I'm going to move it over to Brenda Hamer. And one of the things y'all talked about the most is you wanted to learn about financial management and finance. And so that's what Brenda basically does for a living. And I've been getting a lot of questions lately about QuickBooks and how everybody's so mad at them. And she is doing Centerpoint now. And so if you have any accounting or bookkeeping questions, she's going to be the person to talk to. All right, guys, I think we're going to go ahead and get started back. Like I said, this is Brenda Hamer. I've known Brenda for a very long time. We actually started working in Extension together. She was in Vernon and I was in Amarillo. And since then, she has become a CPA and mostly does bookkeeping for farmers and ranchers. Only farmers and ranchers. And so she is a great resource. And we were just talking about what a challenge it is to try to make that interesting and exciting, but I think she's going to do a good job. So and I'm glad it's not me. We're gonna try. I have no idea how this is gonna work.
So let's see, the advance.
Yeah, it'd be that one. Yes. Thank you.
Okay, actually, my last name is Heimer, but everybody calls me Hamer.
Okay.
I
I call you Duckworth, so.
I know I spent a lot of my career as a Duckworth. So
Yeah.
a lot of people, somebody said the other day, said, isn't there like a Brenda Duckworth too? That does the same thing? And I'm like, that's me. But I got married a few years ago, so, or remarried a few years ago. So it's kind of hard to change over to that new name. At any rate, I do have an accounting firm. We serve only farmers and ranchers and we do only management accounting. So I don't do taxes and I don't do audit. I don't do reviews, any of the things that typical accounts do. I don't do it. I do the stuff they don't usually do. And that's management accounting. We're going to talk a lot more about that in just a few minutes. So, do you know what it means when all your financial statements are in red ink? I mean, that's kind of a poll. I mean, do you know how hard it is to find funny accounting jokes? Because only accountants laugh at them. But y'all did too, so apparently I'm among friends. So I want you to start off understanding that simply keeping records does not mitigate risk. And if you're in business and you're trying to make a profit, you've got to mitigate risk every single day, every hour of the day, right? I mean, that's what farming is. It's just farming and ranching. I don't want to leave the cattle folks out, but it is a lot of risk and the margins are typically pretty small. I think no one would really disagree with that. So before we get into the class exercise, just by a show of hands, how many people know what accrual accounting means? Nobody. Okay. No, really? If nobody wants to just raise your hand or you really don't know? Okay. So I have no idea how this class exercise. I need 2 volunteers. Or you can be an involunteer because I will volunteer you involuntarily.
Oh.
Stand up.
Huh?
Do I need to stand
Yes,
up?
you come up here.
And I'm gonna put someone over here. I just involuntarily nominated you. You guys come up here with me. Ellie, and we got Emma. Okay. All right, we're gonna talk just a little bit. don't worry about you only get one bag.
Okay.
Okay. These bags over here say investment in growing cotton, investment in growing cattle, investment in growing wheat, and income statement. So if you're investing in your crop, that means you're building your crop, right? Pretty easy, actually. All you get's an income statement over here. Okay? You're the cash accountant, and you're the accrual accountant. Okay? So we're gonna kind of pick this story up in, say, June of 24. Okay? So we're gonna sell our wheat. So what I want you to do is take these cards, and we're not gonna worry about the costs associated with this crop right now. And if you were booking it on your QuickBooks or whatever program you use, is that gonna go into your income statement or into one of your investment in growing crops? Well, I'm gonna tell you it's gonna go into investment in growing crops. So actually, on this deal, if you sold it, it's actually on the income statement, so I lied to you. So drop that in your income statement bag, and you drop yours in your income statement bag. And my cards are already messed up.
So are the two income statement bags?
There's only one income statement bag. Over here, because this is the accrual income statement bag. These are all investment in growing crops.
Okay.
And I'm not gonna tell you that on the balance sheet. Those are on the balance sheet, but we're gonna talk about that. Okay, throughout the year, we're gonna buy some chemical. And you get the white card, and you get to put these in the correct investment in growing crop bags.
Good.
So you bought some chemical. In the cash world, that's gonna be an expense, right?
Yes.
So does that go on the income statement?
Yes.
Okay, drop it on in there. Okay. You got a hard job.
These girls are getting their masters in ag eco, so they should know this. stuff.
Oh, both of you two?
Yeah.
Okay, so you.
I'm
Actually,
taking an
can I give
accounting
you a
course
cue?
right now.
Oh, you are?
Yes.
Well, you're gonna come forward. Okay, now we're gonna pay for some rent. And her cards are color coordinated, and they also say which crop it's for. Okay, so drop that in the correct investment in growing crop bag. You can go ahead. Yeah, you've already booked it to the income statement because you're a cash accountant. Okay, now we're gonna buy some feed and some vet. Here's that for you. And here's that for you. And we're gonna buy some fertilizer. Okay, now I'm tricking you on this right quick. Let me just make sure. Okay. So on her wheat card here, I wrote 2025. And on this sales of wheat, remember, this was what we harvested in June. Okay, this was for the crop that was harvested in June. So now she's buying inputs to go for that crop that will be harvested in 2025. Okay, so go ahead and drop those in. And then we're gonna have some seed. And she's gonna get some wheat seed. Yes, correct, because you haven't harvested this crop yet. And here's your seed for your wheat and your cotton. Okay. Now, I just want to stop and point out, we have one bucket over here. And then we have 4 buckets over here. But we only have one income statement, right? And these are actually assets on the balance sheet. Because you're building that asset. You haven't sold it yet. Now we're gonna sell. Okay? We're gonna sell some calves. We're gonna sell some cotton, and we've already sold some wheat. Okay? Oh, you're fine, yeah, that'll work. Okay. Miss the economist. How'd you do? I'd like for you to take your income statement and tell me your performance. And we have easy math. It's like $1, the most is $5.
Oh,
And while she's at that, I'd like for you to.
No,
you're good. Oh, I forgot to say something right quick. Now that she has sold her crops that she was holding in investment in growing crops, right? What happens to these bags right here? When you actually sell your crop? Do what? Where do they go?
To your income statement.
Yeah. Goes to the income statement. But in the meantime, what she can be doing up to that point is she can real easily reach in here and say, well, to date, I've got $1, $2, $3 of costs into my cattle. So she knows at any given time, at any purchase, how much she has invested in her cattle, right? Okay, go ahead and dump all those in here. You have your net income. No, wait, what is net income?
Revenues minus expenses.
Revenues
Yeah.
minus expenses. So tell me what your net income is. Okay, go ahead and add that up. And at the same time, what I'd like for you to do is go over here and tell me what your net income is per crop. Okay? And one little, the wheat. So one thing I didn't mention that I want to mention right quick. The wheat that we are still planting or that we are still tending to that we haven't harvested, should that have been dumped into the income statement yet? Okay, so let's pull this 25 wheat back out. This was for the 24 sales. So we need to pull the 25 wheat back out and put it back in this investment in growing street crops. What was your net income?
$4.
$4. Will you write that down?
Yes.
Ms. Bookkeeper? Just need to, just $4.
We're putting all our.
Just the 25 wheat back in here because we haven't sold it yet. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, just all the yellow parts. You ought to see my spreadsheets. They're all color coordinated too because it helps me to see. Okay, if you want to do this right, I tell you what, I'm gonna take the cattle over here to the cash account and you see what your performance was on your cotton. Let's see what the performance is.
Sorry.
Yes, it does.
Do y'all take this real money?
Okay. Cotton, we've got $2 net income.
I'm trying to convert.
Yeah. It's like, yeah.
Too, but I want to.
Yeah.
For him to hold it down.
That down, come on.
Okay. She's what she did right on me.
It's fine. So we'll figure it out, but it is.
What do you have, 24 weeks? 25.
Well, we sold some 24 weeks, but we don't have any costs for it.
Oh,
So we have 45 weeks still.
Right.
Okay.
I'm not gonna put all of us.
Okay, now,
That's a good idea.
now we're gonna compare net incomes between the two. So if you'll add up, we had $4 on cash net income.
5 on the other.
And from an accrual standpoint, we had 5. Why is the net income not the same?
It's the way you account for your money,
Okay,
but I
keep
don't
going.
know what the difference is.
Because that 25 week,
It's
we haven't sold this 25 week. So it's still on the balance sheet. So 2 things just happened in this particular production year, and this is not every production year. Your net income is not the same. Generally, in the first year you start your accrual accounting, your net income is going to be higher on an accrual basis because you've pulled these costs off the income statement and put them on the balance sheet. What else happens, and this is something I kind of lose focus on sometimes, but also your equity position went up, so your net worth. And net worth is assets minus liabilities, right? And if your assets are higher because you left investment in growing crops on there, then your net worth is higher. So what might a banker think if he sees that? He's gonna be like, well, you're kind of on top of it because you already know what you have invested in your growing crops. So you can go ahead and sit down, Ellie. No,
Yes.
Ellie. You know that. I have a Ellie slide. So what was your net income on your cotton?
I had cattle.
Well, no, you really did.
Oh, I had
Sheep.
cotton cattle. Okay.
So tell me what your net income on your cotton is.
So cotton, would you count for chemical, fertilizer, and seed?
What was that only for cotton? In other words, can you tell me what your net income is for cotton, for wheat and for cattle?
No.
You can't. And I think that's the moral to the story here. And that's the first part of accrual accounting is, well, the whole foundation to accrual accounting. You can go ahead and sit down, Emma. The whole foundation to accrual accounting is the matching principle. What? The matching principle. And I got slide. Oh, I have another funny. It's a cruel world out there. But if you want to make well-informed decisions, you should level up to accrual accounting. Few people do this, but it can be done. Okay, the matching principle. It's basically how did your inputs perform against the revenue presented. So the matching principle is whatever revenue is presented on the income statement, the expenses should have produced that revenue, that particular revenue. So to me, when it's said like that, it kind of hits a little different. Because from a cash accounting standpoint, the way our cash lady over here did it was she had all of those 25 wheat crop costs in on her income statement. Those 25 costs are not matched up to any revenue, right? So it does not adhere to the matching principle. Make sense?
Well, one thing that I see with my farmers is they may have a whole bunch of expenses related to a crop, but they haven't sold all their crop inventory yet. And if it's a cash-based system, they don't keep track of inventory. So they think that their net income is low when it's actually pretty good because they have all this unsold crop. But if you don't have those crop inventories and those accounts payables and accounts receivables, you don't know what your true amount of money you have is.
Right.
So I have a question.
Sure.
That, and I'm sorry if it's very.
No,
but
please, beer.
But in keeping the books, I like checks
Uh-huh.
because we write down what that expense was and what it was for. We can get as specific as we want to get.
Mhm.
But the Tom's now wants us to do everything digitally, deposit digitally. It's like our cotton from PCCA. But there's no good records that go with that you can keep. So how do you do this kind of accounting?
Well, I mean, you may have to create that record,
Uh-huh.
maybe in Excel, or, I mean, we have tons of backup documentation that shows anytime we've made an entry, why we made it, how we made it, where it came from, and where did it go. It sounds like a hillbilly. Where did it come from? Where did it go? So I hear what you're saying.
Well, my son is the one that likes to do everything digitally, but I don't get a record
Yeah.
with that. So
Well, and that, I mean, you know, Ari would say he should be accountable for
Okay.
having records. and
Okay.
documents. Accountability is hard among family businesses. It really is. But, you know, the Natural Prairie Dairy is a family-owned business. And they have their nephews and their sons and their daughters and everybody working there. And they are just as accountable as the next.
So if people use a credit card, let's say,
Yeah.
because they want to
Oh, those are fun,
collect
huh?
points, you've got to come out of that, you've got to go through that statement, then you're saying, and put it all on your
Absolutely.
computer.
That's what we do. I mean, we enter every single charge individually as a vendor invoice and then go in and pay it. And that way we know where it went and what it was. So I don't know if you can see this very well, but this is just kind of our basic report. And this is maybe something that you do in Excel, but there's a few things that I'm betting you don't do. So I'm going to try to, here are your accounts, and I'm going to tell you what the WIP accounts are in just a minute. We've got our 23 corn, and then these are dollars per acre. At any given time, we always know where we are, on a per acre basis. We can even put in a per bushel, like a budgeted per bushel, and it will spit out, the dollars per bushel or calf or whatever you want to do. And then we've got over here, we've got cotton, rice, and sorghum, and all of those on a per acre. The WIP account, where you see WIP, that's work in process, same thing as investment in growing commodity. So these are all balance sheet accounts. So all the purchases that are made for our clients do not hit expense accounts, they hit these WIP accounts. They're posted to a WIP account. They don't move out of these WIP accounts until that crop or that calf or whatever it is sold. Or harvested. If it's harvested and held in inventory, we move them out of WIP accounts into inventory. Okay, this is kind of the overall screenshot of what you'd see. How many of you know your cost of production? Anybody?
I like to think roughly, but
Okay, and
not in detail is what I would also say.
I would say most people kind of have an idea, especially with direct inputs. Seed, chemical, fertilizer, feed, vet, anything that would be direct, you're going to pencil that in. But what you forget about is interest. Well, I'm not going to say interest because I'm kind of having a change of heart on interest lately. But cash rent, office rent, supplies, utilities, gasoline, diesel, labor, all of it is absorbed into the cost of production. And the reason I checked up on interest depreciation, that does not adhere to GAAP, generally accepted accounting procedures. But I've always, my whole career since I was with AgriLife, I wanted to include that in the cost of production because I wanted people to really fully understand the total cost. But I'm working with some pretty big accounting firms that have to do reviewed statements for their clients. And so they're having to jump through a bunch of hoops to back that interest and depreciation back out. So,
If stuff like repairs that you use across multiple enterprises, you allocate that per acre, percent of revenue, how do you allocate the overhead expenses?
So it depends. So if I look at the whole operation, say, is most of your machinery, crops, cattle? It can be something as simple as them saying a percentage to me, or several of our clients, we allocate per head day because they have a bunch of stockers. So, and one of my clients is 100% stockers. So everything is allocated per head day. And we do it monthly. So, it's just a part of the process. Okay. Okay, so cost of production. I'm really amazed and that more people don't. And I'm not mad. Well, I am mad, but I'm mad at some of the service providers because our tax accountants have said, all you need is cash basis tax. We only need this for tax purposes. And what that has done in my eyes, and I'm not mad at them, they're doing their job. But on the other hand, it's giving you no information whatsoever. And then their reluctance to do something outside of that box has made it even worse. And I see it every day. So I think if I'm going to be mad, I'm probably mad at them. And I still like tax accountants. I really do because I don't do my own taxes. But as an industry, as a service provider, I think agriculture in particular is very underserved on financial accounting help. So there's my spiel. We got to know our cost of production. If we're going to have any strategies whatsoever, we've got to know what that cost of production is. So if you flip your accounting system on its ear and say, here's what my system is designed for, and you start with decision-based reporting or management accounting, it is so easy to feed from that good, solid, accrual-based system into your tax reporting. It just like butter. it can go very easily to your lender, very easily to your insurance reporting and your FSA government reporting. And the reason I brought these two down here is because the system I use holds each field individually. And so it's really easy to spit those reports out on what you planted per crop and what field it is and how many acres of that field you planted. Okay. Show of hands, don't be shy. How much of what I've said already is it kind of foreign to you? Anybody? Okay, let's flip it the other way. Anybody here pretty familiar with what I've been talking about? You're familiar.
Yeah.
You do accrual accounting.
For my grandmother likes to do it.
Uh-huh.
The boys don't really like to follow it. So it's a 50-50 here on what we do.
Yeah.
But I know, I follow it because my grandmother has done it.
Oh,
For a
well,
long
that's her. I would say back in the 80s, 90s, when you and I were just getting started,
It's all cash pretty much.
well, no,
We
but
got
I
more.
mean, our mentors
Oh, yeah.
were really blazing a trail and telling people we've got to get, and they were making some headway on that front.
Mhm.
As far as the Farm Financial Standards Council guidelines, so Ari is a member. I'm a past president of the Farm, and I think you're going this year. I think you're a member. Are you a member?
I think so. I don't know. I don't
And,
think so.
Anyway,
I've spoken at it before. So.
yeah. So some of the people that Dee Dee and I both have looked up to, probably our whole career, kind of were some of the trailblazers in that organization. They basically standardized the accounting procedures and reporting requirements for agriculture. So anyway, management accounting. There is a time and an education investment. So is it easy? No. Is it worth it? I mean, I don't know how you operate without it. At least on some level. It doesn't have to go to the length that I go to with
And that's what
mine.
I tell my guys. It doesn't have to be
No.
extremely extensive, but just do something, know your
Yeah.
crop inventories, your investment in growing crops, your accounts payable, your accounts receivable.
At
All that
minimum.
helps a lot. So,
Minimum.
yeah.
Oh, inventories. I mean,
Yeah.
we have run into so many problems with inventories. It's especially with cattle.
Mhm.
I have a client that I picked up in, I don't know, August. And we are trying to reconcile cattle inventories on 4 companies back to 2021. Yeah, it's been fun. Last week, I think we were on the phone with him every day, Monday through Thursday, no less than 2 hours a day, trying to work through this. Finally got there. Okay, management accounting. There is an investment, time and education. But your data is formed into information. And so if you've got better information, then all of your other processes are going to go more smoothly. You can make better decisions. Communication is improved. For the most part, I mean, I know, like you were saying, some of the guys don't want to follow it. And I think Dave Ramsey says, no one really fears change. They just either don't understand it or it doesn't benefit them. So if they see the benefit to them and understand it better, they might come around and say, how can this benefit me? What can benefit them by them being given information by which to manage? So anyway, I get a little bit on the soapbox, so y'all might have to get the shot collar after me.
I call my brother, so we can.
Yeah. And overall sustainability, because, I like to use that just because it's kind of me making fun of the, I shouldn't be so political, but all the whole sustainability buzz, and I'm all about sustainability, but how are you going to be sustainable if you go to business?
Yeah.
So. All right. Kind of the design is going to be, first of all, an accounting software that can handle the information that you need to keep separate. I use Centerpoint. You heard Ari mention Centerpoint. That's all I use, simply because QuickBooks cannot do it. It can't. Well, we did back in 2000, early 2000s. I helped teach management accounting using QuickBooks. So we had some spreadsheets. I'd be happy to share them with you. I'd be happy to tell you how to use them, and it works pretty good the first year, and after that, it's kind of tough. I mean, depending on the size of your operation, I just picked up a client this year that was in our original TTAP program that we taught this management accounting to. He's been using it since 2002. And he finally said, this is ridiculous. So we converted him to Centerpoint, and it's unbelievably easy. Okay, so you got to have a good system that can hold the data that you want. You got to be able to segregate those income and costs by enterprise, commodity, production years, a really big one. We went through that with the wheat just now. You got to know which production year you're talking about. Cattle is, I'm telling you, cattle can throw a wrench in it because some people are constantly selling cattle and constantly buying cattle. So that you have to pick a way and just be consistent with that. And then to hold your costs in WIP accounts until the commodity is sold.
Like with wheat's a great example because there's a lot of guys that will harvest 25 wheat and have that in inventory, but they also have expenses for 26 wheat all in the same year. And how do you know what expense goes to what crop, And if you're cash based, you have no idea.
No idea. Yeah, that's exactly right. Okay, some of the things that you're gonna need, your inventories. Over the last year to 2 years, I think I'm gonna, from now on, when I onboard a client, I'm gonna start with inventories. Because that has proven to be one of the hardest parts to reconcile. Harvested crops, not so much until you start feeding those harvested crops to cattle. Cattle, I'm telling you, they throw a wrench in everything, and I love it. I mean, that's what got me into accounting. But it's very difficult. Get your inventories segregated, correct, reconciled, and often reconciled. Total acres, there's always some discussion between your total acres and your planted acres. We've always got some corners out there that maybe you plant to a winter crop so your cattle can graze the corners or something like that. Again, understanding what you're trying to get out of the system and then molding the system around that and being consistent going forward. FSA and insurance documents, we start with those. If we're onboarding a farmer rather than a rancher, ranchers is a little bit different, but the farmers will get those and then set up each field individually into the system. And then we can apply inputs specifically to that field or allocated costs. Your equipment list and other fixed assets. This is also proven to be a little bit of a wreck. One of my clients recently, on his depreciation schedule, it just said Western equipment. And there was like 4 of those throughout the year. And then over multiple years, we're like, what is this? Turns out the bookkeeper that was doing it at the time had simply taken all of the purchases to Western equipment, which were mostly repairs, and put them on the depreciation schedule. So look at that, let your accountant know what has been disposed of, what's come on new. It's pretty important. You'll need to know any bank statements, any checking account statements, loan statements, hedging statements. We reconcile all of that. Hedge statements are really simple to keep up with if you just keep up with them. Okay, input applications. I mentioned this just a minute ago. We apply depending on the client. Some clients don't want the field segregation because it's just not relevant to them. Because like one of our clients, they have some corn and some wheat or rye, I guess, but most of it is fed to the cattle. So they don't really need to evaluate that per circle. And then we have other clients that are very diligent about evaluating each field individually. So it just kind of depends on what the client wants. And then your lease arrangements. For us, this is important because when we set up those fields in the system, everything is tied to an ownership or a lease agreement so that the system knows if it's a crop share, it can automatically take the crop shared percentage out of the production. so it's not shown on the balance sheet. Okay, back to inventories again. The types of inventories that are best for you to keep and that you really, really need. And again, it depends. If you don't carry over input inventories, you don't need to measure them. But if you are gonna buy some inputs in 1 year for either a tax strategy or, a pricing strategy, then you need to show that inventory on your balance sheet. For us, it's important because we reconcile all of those raw materials accounts. So if we've got, usually we just do seed, chemical, fertilizer, and feed as a raw material. So does anybody know what a raw material is? And don't just say it's a material that's raw. It just means it's an unused or an unapplied input, okay? The WIP accounts are for those inputs that are already applied or fed or whatever the case. But if you've got in your barn, you've got a bunch of chemical, then as you cross the calendar year, it's kind of important to have that on your balance sheet, especially if you're going to go to a lender. But for us, it's going to be important because we're going to apply those inputs and you're going to say, why is my chemical so high in this current year? Or why is it so low? Well, you didn't tell me about that inventory you had in your barn that you applied. That's why your chemical is so low. So we hold it in our system, and don't get mad at me, don't throw anything at me, but we actually hold it by product in the system. So if whatever product of fertilizer it is or chemical, we can tell you what the quantity is remaining.
You do that through Centerpoint?
Yeah, we do. And again, I would say only less than half of our clients do that because it's not important to them. Or they don't carry inventories over. If they just said it wasn't important, but I knew they had a bunch of inventory out there, I'd probably fuss. So, one of our clients has, they grow their crops and they feed them, then they buy other inputs. And so each month when we meet with him, actually we meet with him every 2 weeks, we go over those inventories and he looks at it and he says, oh, I think cottonseed hulls is a little off here. I went out to the bin, last week, and I can tell you we don't have that much out there. So we look at it and see what happened, fix it, make sure it's right. So now he's always got a reconciled inventory, and we do the cattle the same way. So we've got our input inventories by cost, what the quantities are, and then as they move from raw materials, from inventories, they go to a WIP inventory, and then it's held by crop, by crop year. And any other designation. I put other there for product. And again, that's seed, chemical, fertilizer in your raw materials and feed. Okay, so stored crops. So any of your harvested crops, and this is going to be a little bit of the kicker. The way we do things on the accrual basis, your inventory of your harvested crops is in there at what it actually costs you, not at fair market value. This system also holds a fair market value if you want that. It has a separate column you can drop that fair market value in. But if you know what it costs you to produce that inventory, then as you sell it, then that matching principle a minute ago is adhered to. Your revenue is here. What it actually costs you to produce that crop is here. If you drop in a fair market value, sorry, you drop in a fair market value, then it's not matched up. It's not. It basically would be a zero income. Okay, your livestock. This is a picture of my friend in Wyoming. Her little boy roping. I just thought it was cute. He's going to be in a couple of those pictures. So again, the harvested crops and livestock by quantity, crop year, and for the cattle, we have those broken down between raised and purchased, and then what phase of production. So we may have, our unweaned calves, our raised calves, our purchased stockers, our feeders. And we may have a preconditioning phase of production too, if they want to look at that preconditioning phase. We talked about lease arrangements. Basically, you just got to be consistent with, are you going to go on planted acres or boundary acres? So, I think y'all could probably tell Ari and I are pretty good friends because we used to work together. I used to work at Agrivision with her. And, one of the things that so I actually converted the farm side to Centerpoint while I was there. And one of the things that Sherry would come in and ask is, hey, we got to do our insurance reporting. Can you pull those crop acres for me? So I could just go into the system and just say 25 crop plan, and there it is. Problem is, we needed to, I think we had planted acres in there and they needed boundary acres or plantable acres or something. So you got to know what the people you're going to report to need, and then go with that number. So if you know you're going to pull it out of Centerpoint and take it to your crop insurance people, can hold it on their acres, because the system will allow you to say, well, it may have 100 acres, but only planted 50, and that's fine, or 85 of it. So it's the system as you design that is going to go against what you actually planted. So let's talk about your applications, because I just talked about acres, and I'm so used to doing this that my mind skips a little bit. So the reason acres are important for me and why it's important to put those acres in the system is because in Centerpoint, you can write an allocation definition and you can tell the system to go get these accounts. I want, if I'm going to do a overhead allocation, okay, system, go get labor and utilities and whatever else you deem to be allocated under overhead. And then I can tell the system, okay, I want you to allocate it to the crops that are actually accepting inputs right now on a per acre basis. And the acre's already there. And you push a button and it goes. And then you look at it, and if it's messed up, you just delete it and delete it. I mean, you don't have to, like the way we used to do it on QuickBooks, you had to do a zillion journal entries and you didn't know till you were finished with all those journal entries if something was wrong. And then, goodness, I hope something doesn't change, because then you got to redo
that's a pain.
all of those. And on the allocation in the system, you just delete it and redo it. Now I'm trying to make it sound as if it's a lot more simple than it is. I'm not trying to make it, but it is. It's not that simple. Okay. I mean, you're going to have a powerful system that can do a lot of things. Anything that's that powerful is not going to be simple. But then you have to decide, do you want it simple or do you want some information? And a lot of people really don't want information, and that's fine. I mean, if it's, a hobby farm or whatever the case, maybe it's simple enough. Like Ari said, if you only have one crop and one entity, you may not need something like this. But if you have multiple entities or multiple companies, you might want to consider something like this. Okay, so where I was going with the acreage is on the applications or the inputs, because you can allocate it very easily. Centerpoint also, outside of the allocations feature, has a feature to apply crop inputs. So earlier when I said I had all those products lined out, how many people in here use like JD Ops or, some kind of tractor management that knows what you're putting out on the crop and how many acres it put out at what rate? Anybody have that? So what we do is we go into the JD Ops or Harvest Profit, whatever it is that's holding that data. And we then say, okay, well, you put this many gallons out on this crop or on this field, and we put it in here like that. And the dollars follow it is kind of my point. Because if I know how many gallons you put out there and I know what it costs per gallon to buy that, then all I do is go in and say 50 gallons on this field and 75 gallons on this field and go. And then the dollars come with it and go to that crop, that field. Okay, if you're the records that you need to keep. So sales, that's pretty easy, you'd think, but the quantity, of course, the date of the sale, the crop year, and is it raised or purchased if you're talking about cattle. The date can become very important because you can either forward contract or you can, sell something or just store it, not even sell it. If it crosses a calendar year, I mean, we do everything through payables or receivables, pretty much, not everything, we don't. But, if Pinion, the accounting firm that works with a couple of my clients calls and says, hey, what was your payables at the end of this month? I can just pull it right out of the system and show them, or my receivables in this case. Okay, fixed assets, we kind of already talked about that. In Centerpoint, the important point here is on the balance sheet. You can hold it at both the cost and a fair market value. So you can print it out pretty quickly for your lender if that's the case. I need to pause. Any questions so far? Sometimes I get on a roll, and sometimes I just want to make sure everybody's with me. Y'all have any questions? Are you following? Anybody lost? Blank stares. Okay. Please stop me if you have questions, because I do tend to ramble on a little bit, and I get very, very excited about this, as you can tell. This is probably a good point to back up and say, I never, ever dreamed of being an accountant. And that was the furthest thing from my mind. And I was out of college for 5 years before I decided to go back. And the only reason I did it was because I was working for AgriLife, getting to work with producers, and I loved it. I was working on a project. Farm assistance is still, that's what you do.
Yeah, I still
That's
do
what
it.
you do.
Yeah, part-time.
Yeah. So that's when that program was being developed. And I loved looking at the projected analysis. And so myself and two other girls, after my grant was up with AgriLife, myself and two other girls at the time said, hey, we want to start this consulting business. They were both pretty well known in the cattle industry. Both of them had a lot of cattle knowledge and some bookkeeping, and I had a lot less cattle knowledge and a little more bookkeeping. So we went to, does anybody in here know Jim McGran, Dr. Jim McGran? He was kind of a icon in the cattle industry for many, many years, worked for
I don't
AgriLife.
know Steve Amison or Jackie Smith. He was kind of the economist, their counterpart over in Vernon. So,
Well, he wasn't in Vernon, he was in College Station.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Yeah.
I was thinking Stan.
Dan, yeah. Anyway, we went to Dr. McGran and we said, hey, we have this idea, because he'd worked a lot in the cattle industry. What do you think? He said, I think that's a great idea, but at least one of you needs to go back and get your CPA license. And I went, oh, okay. I had no idea what I was getting into. The point being, it's not, I don't know if anybody just really loves accounting. I mean, some people do, but I like to figure out what I can do with that information. Kind of a necessary evil. It starts to make a difference if you just dig your heels in and do it, or, find somebody to help you, whatever that is. Why are you over there laughing? Because you want to.
She just texted me and said this is what she's gonna do when she goes home.
Oh, yeah.
Good, that's great.
Yeah.
I was just thinking, I never intended to grow up to become an economist. I doubt y'all did either. Is that what you want to do?
No.
No, I was to be an astronaut. I don't
I was gonna be a horse trainer.
Yeah, I know. I just
At least your sights were a little higher.
so I took physics. I realized I could not be an astronaut. So
Oh, well, that's cool. Anyway, back to this. Had to kind of take a break because I was losing y'all. Not losing you mentally, but I think you're falling asleep. Okay, head counts, and then you can go into budgets. I won't go into detail on each one of these. If you see something you have a question about, let me know. See, Ellie, I told you she was on there. Eleanor's our dog. She says that's a lot of record keeping. She's the sweetest dog in the world, but she does not like delivery people. Today, when I was about to come down here, she put one right back in the van. I said, she said, it was a female, thank goodness, because they kind of can relate. She says, does she want a snack? I said, oh, she'll be your best friend forever. She'll never forget her after she gave her a snack. Okay, so Ellie says that's a bunch of record keeping, and it is. But if you have a system that makes sense and produces a really good result, then it's really not that big a deal.
Well, one thing I like about it is my farmers plant the same thing every year, and they don't know is their corn profitable or is their cotton profitable? Or they have certain farms that are underperforming, but you don't know that. And
Yeah.
so if you've got the enterprise budgeting, just kind of what she's talking about, you can make a lot better management decisions.
Well, and Emma over here, the cash accountant, she exemplified that because she could reach in there, it was the same information. Same dollars, same everything, except that she couldn't decide what was for her crops and what was for her cattle.
Or are your purchased cows or calves or your raised calves better? You know, that's not something you can do without the enterprise accounting. So.
We have a client that they run about 25,000 stockers out around California and Nebraska. And we have their stockers broken down by type of cattle. They have some commercial cattle, they have some gap cattle, they have some embryo calves. So they can look at that now. And I'll never forget the other day, the owner said, looks like those embryo calves are doing pretty good. Like beating them like a drum on everything else. So he could decide which kind of cattle were doing better. Not only that, we also have it broken down by ranch location. So we can evaluate the head day cost at each ranch, as well as tracking those costs through to when the cattle sell. Is it a lot of work? Yes. There's a girl that works for me that is phenomenal, and she's at about 30 hours a week working for them right now. It's a full-time job. If you're that big, they're very complex. They got a lot of moving parts. Cattle are coming in, cattle are going out. They're moving, ranch locations. So it depends on how complex and how many transactions you have. But for her, and they're trying to hire her out from under me. But I'll also say my profit margin is in the tank with them because we spend so many hours with them. Okay. Purchases. So here's the easy part. This is what you do every day when you're doing your book. How many people in here do your bookkeeping for your operation? So about half, maybe a little more than half. Okay. So this is the easy part. You get your cash transactions from your bank statement. You also need to consider any vendor accounts. So a lot of people make purchases on vendor accounts, and you need to book those into your accounting system as well, because that is a cost. You just haven't paid for it yet. Loan drafts. We always reconcile the loans. So several of our clients operate on those draft accounts. So we can catch any of those purchases or sales through that draft account. And then what about family? And I think this is on here I have to take a deep breath before I talk about this, but I have another client that has some family loans, and then they have 4 other entities. So there's money going every which way. So we have to track which company owes the other. It's fine if you want to send money to another company, that's fine, but just track it and make sure that you understand who owes whom for what. It can't just be willy-nilly. So here's the not so easy part, and especially if you're using something like QuickBooks, that matching principle we talked about earlier. In CenterPoint, you assign a production year to all the transactions. By commodity, you can use classes in QuickBooks, and maybe jobs, something else. I think we used classes when we were doing the management accounting. It may have some other features, but I think there's probably, I don't know, let's say 7 to 10 data fields that you can, there's really more than that, but 7 to 10 that are actually usable, where you can mold different reports by in CenterPoint, that many different fields of data that you can use. So again, which commodity is it? What field is it for if you're farming and that interests you? And what product is it if you're going to that level? So this is a little graphic of what we did earlier with the income statements in the investment and growing crops. So just kind of tracking it through. We start with the vendor invoice, then it goes to a WIP account, and that's a balance sheet account. Then at harvest, it moves into inventory if you're gonna store it. So there's your inventory in the bottom right corner. or it goes to the income statement if you sell it. So that's just kind of a visual of how those costs flow. If you're doing cash accounting, it's going straight from either the vendor invoice or just the payment straight down to here. Okay, it's really important to reconcile your bank accounts, your loan accounts, your hedge accounts. Intercompany accounts is the client I mentioned that does a lot of money transferring. We now have intercompany accounts that I reconcile because company A got money from company B, so they owe company B. Company B should have that same transaction, just opposite. Oh, one thing I haven't mentioned yet, and this is not a sales pitch for Centerpoint. It's just, honestly, it becomes one because I love Centerpoint. I don't know how people operate without it. Not perfect by any means. It frustrates me sometimes. But, in Centerpoint, you can hold multiple companies in the same database. So like with QuickBooks, you have to have a different file for each company. In Centerpoint, you can have them all in there. One of my clients, and I'm kind of glad he's not a client right now, I have to say, 18 bank accounts, and I think that was over 8 companies, maybe more than that. It was ridiculous, and money was going every which way. And the only reason I mean, he was a great person, but oh, that was a lot of work. Keep as much as you can in the accounting software if it's going to be useful. Excel can definitely help, but it just can't effectively hold your cost of production year after year. I've met a lot of people that do a really good job in Excel, but if one thing changes, you've got to go back and find where that one thing was. It doesn't update all of the numbers because it's not in the accounting system. And year over year, it's really tough to reconcile if you're trying to do allocations of overhead. Centerpoint is powerful and it's actually made for agriculture. It can be difficult to set up, especially if you don't have help. And on that point, they have a great support staff. I tell people the only accent that you're going to hear is a Minnesota accent because they don't know how to say ag. They say egg.
If anybody's ever called support for QuickBooks, it's not going to be a local accent. So, yeah.
But anyway, they're there to help. So is all this really worth it? Does anybody get frustrated about not knowing where you are financially and what's happening in the business? Yes, you do. Can you tell a story about that or just
I
expand?
mean, I don't have a business. I work for AgriLife, so I don't have a business, but
Okay,
I mean, yeah.
you could see that.
Well, I get really frustrated with my farmers that they have all this cash, but they don't have an accounts payable. So they think that is cash to go out and buy equipment, and they don't realize they have all this bills against that cash. And so they make purchases that get them in trouble because they don't realize they actually owe more money than they have in the bank.
Yeah.
So, and that happens a lot. I'm sure you see that too.
Yeah. Anybody else have stories about being frustrated about maybe not knowing where you are or what's happening financially? You can look at your bank account, but do you understand what's causing it? Nobody faces that.
From a marketing standpoint, how do you market if you don't know your break evens? Yeah, because you can't do a break even without a cost of production.
Is that, we don't know the cost of production.
Yeah.
And so you're in this there's rough patch.
Yeah.
So are you getting a price that covers the cost of production?
Well, we know we're not. We
Yeah.
all know that.
Yeah. If you're farming this year, you probably aren't.
You're not.
So.
Yeah, but if you knew your cost of production, especially if you've got a few years of this type of analysis under your belt, the more years you have, the better your projections can be. So if you know that, your direct costs are fairly easy, to project out, unless you have price changes. But the overhead, we have found at least 60%, or in most cases, about 60% of your total cost comes from overhead. And that varies if you're farming or ranching. But if you don't include that, how are you, you know, and you mark it based just on your direct costs, that's what's sinking the ship because you're not accounting for all your overhead. But you could decide, you know, let's say prices shot way up and you could forward contract or go ahead and hedge, you know, then you have some protection there. The client that has all of the stockers, you know, with cattle prices the way they are, they've got margin calls coming left and right. Everything is LRP protected. And the owner's not worried at all about it because, you know, we've got some pretty solid projections and he can take this to the bank and say, it may look real bad right now, but look at what it's gonna look like in 3 months, you know, when I start selling cattle. Cause all those cattle are gonna hit the market about fall. August through about July to September. So the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Just leave that right there. That's also my friend's son, Trig. So decisions are going to put you on top of the pile. You can't manage what you don't measure. I'd also have other clients that measure everything and it means nothing. So, I mean, only manage or only measure that you can make a decision. I'm running over.
Yeah, that's good. So
We're
probably got like 3 left, don't you?
Yeah, I think so. Oh, okay. Pros and cons of Centerpoint versus QuickBooks. I just threw up, and that's in your slide deck there. But just some of the things that Centerpoint can do, some of the things it can't do. Again, it's not perfect. It doesn't sync with your bank account. It's written on an older platform. It looks almost just like QuickBooks Desktop. You know, a lot of people don't like the new online. Because I hate it because you can't maneuver around in it. It doesn't have like an open windows list. So that's one of among many things. But if you need to toggle between reports on online, you either have to open a new session or close it and then go find it again, memorize it, whatever. That one little thing drives me nuts. Where you know, on the desktop, you always had the open windows list and you could toggle. So Centerpoint is like that, and it just looks very, very similar. Another con to Centerpoint is it's not widely used by tax accountants. So a lot of people say, well, I got to go check with my tax accountant. And the tax accountant will say, well, I'm not using that. We don't want to learn a new program. And my response is, I mean, there has to be some give and take. But who's paying the bill here? You know, I mean, if you have a good relationship with your tax accountant and you want to keep using them, you know, and yet you want to do something like this, then you might just try to have a discussion with them and say, hey, you know, what can we do here? Because it is very important to not manage. Why do we do our entire accounting system based on one line item expense, and that's income tax expense? Our entire system is developed around income tax expense. Why do we not do something that measures everything and flows well into income tax expense? Anyway, blows my mind. Cost of Centerpoint, the basic is $11.95. Each one of the modules, the basic, the management accounting, and the payroll are $11.95. The management accounting module allows you to do the allocations. If you don't want to use WIP accounts, you can still use expense accounts and use a feature called distributions, which is also, it's in the basics. The payroll is a very, very good payroll system. It's updated often for any payroll, any of the state income tax percentages and stuff. It's very extensive, and you can also do your 1099s and your W-2s and do your payroll tax deposits and quarterly reports and all that stuff through there. Okay, and then so the one-time purchase is the module cost that I told you about, $11.95. You own it, you own your data. After that, you can always access your data. The support, if you have the payroll and the management accounting, they require you to have support because they know you're going to use it. And you pick up the phone and you call them and they answer in English. And then they can remote into your computer and kind of help you through. I call them all the time. And I know a lot about Centerpoint, but if I have an issue with something, I just call them and say, help me fix it. I'm not gonna spend a lot of time on this looking at it. Okay, QuickBooks Pros, widely used, has that newer format. It syncs with your bank accounts. But you have fewer fields of data, so it's a little more simple. Makes sense. It does offer payroll services. The cons are pretty much what the pros were on Centerpoint. And I'm biased. I know I'm biased. The cost, if you look at it, it's about the same because
Yeah, we recommend the plus or higher, because if you want to do inventory and enterprise, you have to at least have the plus. And that's every single year.
that's every year.
Yeah. And I was actually just looking at the desktop. If you want to run one company, it's $1,800 every year. If you want multiple companies, it's $2,200 every
If you
year.
can
So
even find it to
if you
buy.
can find it. So they're trying to phase out the desktop. And I like the desktop. I don't like online, but they're basically kind of forcing us to use it. So.
Yeah. I went to the Commodity Classic, a couple of weeks ago in Denver, and I can't tell you the number of people that were seeking the Red Wing booth, which Red Wing owns Centerpoint, saying, we gotta have some different software. I'm sick of this Intuit stuff, this QuickBooks stuff. So I was surprised at how many people came
I had a
by.
farmer tell me it's not QuickBooks, it's Quick Crooks now.
Yeah.
So I don't completely disagree. I mean, I still teach it all the time, but it is frustrating.
It is,
So.
it's very, and there's frustrating parts about Centerpoint too. I'm not gonna sit here and act like there's not. This is my last slide and I'm so sorry.
Oh, no,
I'm kinda
actually,
like a Baptist
technically not over till 8:30, so you're good. I
Oh,
tell
okay.
everybody 8, so they don't go too far over.
I get a little talkative.
Yeah.
I
We
get a
all
little
do.
talkative. If this is something that you're interested, again, I'm not, this shouldn't have been a sales pitch. I'm not trying to pitch it. I'm passionate about it because I just think that I don't know why people wouldn't use it, because you can use it as simply as you want or as complex as you want. If it's something you want to learn more about, I could give you a little demo. If it's something you want to purchase, I can help you get a discount. And another thing, we've written SOPs for all of our clients, and we kind of have a standard little SOP. It's not in depth. It wouldn't be customized to your operation. Be happy to give that to you. Just if it's something that will help. I'm serious. I just have a very deep passion for helping ag producers get on a better foot, because I just think that you've been underserved for too many years on the financial end. Any questions?
All right. Well, thank you, Brenda. We appreciate